This video contains graphic descriptions. Have you ever heard of victims actually volunteering to be a cannibal's next meal? Well, I'm about to tell you about one of them, a man named Bernd Jorgen Brands. What was going on in his mind that he chose to be a willing victim of one of Germany's most popular cannibals? You are watching Crime Tales
After Nightfall.
It was the late 1990s in Berlin. The 43-year-old software developer, Brands, had intimate relations with both men and women. He had confusions about his identity, but was eventually able to come out to his partners. They thought that his confusion was the extent of his issues. But then he began to ask some very specific requests in the bedroom to one of his male partners, which were very disturbing. Brands wanted him to bite off his genital. Yes, you heard that right. He was even willing to pay him as much as $4,600 to do it. The partner said that Brands kept pressuring him to do it, and that he always achieved intense pleasure just thinking about it.
He wanted to be bitten everywhere, but there was his fantasy, his obsession.
Brands was left with an unfulfilled longing that felt like an itch he couldn't scratch. It's perhaps similar to suffering a lifetime of being unable to be satisfied. Until finally he found a man who was willing to do exactly what he wanted. A man who understood his needs and hunger. In 2001, Armin Maves put out an ad in a cannibal chat room for a well-built man, 18 to 30, who would like to be eaten by me. He was a self-confessed cannibal who, just like Brands, had disturbing fantasies since he was 8 years old. He fantasized about killing and devouring people, even as a child. At the time of his ad, it was uncommon and crazy to meet strangers on the internet. But Bernd Brands, who was in the same chat room, didn't care. His desire to be mutilated was, after all, even crazier. And so they started chatting online, sharing their fantasies, maybe even exchanged their emotional pains in life. Cause see, a couple psychiatrist said that both men had troubled relationships with their mothers. They believed Brands might have blamed himself for his mother's death in a car crash when he was 12 years old. His father often described the accident as suicide. Meanwhile, Maves had to deal with a horrible mother. She was incredibly controlling. She even demanded to be with her son on dates. And so, after some back and forth chatting, relating to each other, and maybe even falling in love because they understood each other, the two men agreed to meet. Brands was ready to die by this time. He even made out a will, leaving his possessions to his last lover, who never knew about his secret desires. Maves took Brands to his farmhouse in Rothenburg, where he also showed him his slaughter room. After having dinner, talking and connecting about their disturbing cravings, they prepared themselves to do the unthinkable. Brands took 20 sleeping pills and drank some alcohol to ease the pain, and Maves asked for Brands' consent to be killed and eaten. He videotaped that consent as well as what happened the rest of that night. Together, they fulfilled each other's fantasies. Brands even helped Maves plan what to do with his body after.
We talked about exactly what would happen. Bernd had very bizarre ideas, and guidelines how he had planned his end.
They even shared frustrations that the flesh was too tough for them to eat. But Brands quickly became too weak from the blood loss. He was ready to face his death and bleed out in peace. And so Meaves took him to his bathtub and ran him a bath as he waited for the end. Brands drifted in and out of consciousness while soaked in water and his own blood.
Eigentlich unverständlich, aber er war glücklich da, wie er in seinem eigenen Blute saß.
The next morning, Armin found Brands still alive, and he finally ended his suffering by stabbing him in the neck. He then hung his body on a meat hook, and then he chopped up the parts and put them in a freezer. He buried the skull in his garden like they planned. Over the course of several months, Armin ate parts of Brands, about 44 pounds of him. After this, Meaves continued looking for willing victims online, and he was eventually arrested after a student reported him. In the long trial, he maintained that Brands wanted to be killed and eaten. His words were supported by the 4-hour video recording he made that night. But see, prosecutors said that Brands was suffering from a severe psychiatric disorder and a strong desire for self-destruction, which could have been a result of his guilt blaming himself for his mother's death. Meaves was eventually sentenced to life imprisonment, and even though he admitted that he regretted having killed Brands, he believed that with each piece he ate, he became closer to him, that even Brands' English-speaking skills passed on to him. He felt that eating Brands completed him and gave him a soulmate.
I killed a man, slaughtered him and ate him. Since then, he is always with me.
Now, I, of course, don't consider this crime acceptable in any way, even though there was a consent, and even though the victim himself wanted to die, because both of these men needed help, and that is what they should have gotten. But I do understand the source of each man's frustrations. It just so happened that their needs complemented each other's, and it's probably because of it that this has become one of the first ever cases of so-called love cannibalism. Have you ever heard of a clothing store that exists to help people and not make profits? Well, you have to visit our store, honesty.global, a unique humanitarian clothing where you get to choose who you want to help while buying amazing high-quality clothes. If you appreciate what we do, please support our charity work by visiting honesty.global.